I titled today's Neville Goddard conversation, The Meaning Revealed on the Surface. The premise of our conversation is this quote here, in which he states, "Now is the time to control our imagination and attention." By control, I do not mean restraint by willpower, but rather cultivation through love and compassion. This information is extremely powerful. It has transformed many relationships in my life. Personal relationships, business relationships, and throughout these videos I've shared many stories. This information has also transformed my relationship with my father. I grew up where it didn't appear on the surface that we understood each other. Yet there were conversations that we had where I felt that I was looking at it from a very surface level perspective. That there was deeper meaning in our relationship that one day I would unravel. Now, upon working with this information, our relationship has transformed. There is a deep level of understanding and peace, harmony, love, and compassion for each other. See, this quote here helps articulate this very accurately, in which he says, "Your world is a grand mirror, constantly telling you who you are. As you meet people, they tell you by their behavior who you are." Now, there's a certain point on this journey where we take 100% responsibility for our lives. And perhaps this may be a continuum. Maybe a person takes responsibility in some areas of their lives. For me, it was the financial situation. It was communication skills in regards to business relationships. Upon working with this information and bringing these interactions, relationships with others in harmony, we discover even more ways of applying this information. Perhaps it goes out at a broader scale. Some seek to have conversations with others that help them in a mass scale, such as putting out information on social media, holding talks, events, workshops, giving speeches. And I've met many who, through their entrepreneurial endeavors, share this information as a result of working with it and their own reference experience with their clients. And as we continue down this pathway, we find more and more applications for this information. And like the tried, tested, and true ways that it works, we find that it works in different kinds of relationships, such as what I shared. What at one point I thought was perhaps highly unlikely or almost impossible that it could really be the way it is now. It happened to be this way, and this point right here articulates it really well. So an imaginary conversation, you reap an act. So an act, you reap a habit. So a habit, you reap a character. So a character, you reap your destiny. One of my favorite quotes from Neville. And this is true because every day we have an opportunity to observe the inner dialogues, what we are imagining, how we are thinking, what we are believing in relation with others and ourselves. And if it's not true to how we actually are, where we intuitively imagine ourselves to be in our ideal, then we have the power to change those inner conversations right there in the moment. Now, as we continue to do this imaginal act, this inward act in our mind's eye, which is in harmony with the facts of imagination of how it actually is, from the perspective of love, becomes a habit. We notice that we're doing this wherever we go. I notice this happens when I'm in public, when I'm having conversations with people that I met for the first time, wherever I am, when I'm driving down the street, when I'm walking on the sidewalk. I notice that my mind tends to orient towards seeing others more so today than ever before as a result of, as he says, sow an imaginary conversation, you reap an act. Sow an act, you reap a habit. Sow a habit, you reap a character. Sow a character, you reap your destiny. This becomes automatic. That's the power of working with imagination, which we always had the ability to do this, although we may have not given credit to the power of imagination to the degree that we are doing today as a result of working with this information. So he makes this very simple. He says, we are required to do nothing more than accept the gift before it is observed in the outer world. Creation is finished, and you have free will to choose the state in which you occupy. So we can choose any state of mind, and it is revealed by our inner conversations, what we say when we talk to ourselves, how we relate to others, how we think others relate to us, behavioral patterns, emotional patterns, mental patterns. We have the ability to observe these thoughts and switch into a different state of mind by suggesting to ourselves, I am that way now, or in imagination, see them as their ideal. As a person fuses with this state, they become one with it, and they notice that their thinking patterns change, their emotional patterns change, their behavioral patterns change. Everything changes. Everything rearranges to reflect that vision. Now, I say this many times, repetition of the same information and repetition of the same information from different perspectives, and we can say in resonance with the vision. So are we holding true to the idea of how it actually is in our imagination? By engaging in inner dialogues from that premise, are we being in observation on the day-to-day journey to ensure that we are in that state? As we continue to maintain that state via the inner conversation and what is in harmony with that state, we are repeating that same information, and that is what is harmonizing upon the subconscious mind and expressing as the changes in ourselves and the changes in others, as he says here. Sow an imaginary conversation, you reap an act. Sow an act, you reap a habit. Sow a habit, you reap a character. Sow a character, you reap your destiny. And so we're always oriented towards the character that we resonate with, what we truly love, what we truly desire, how we truly want to live. We will notice this as a pattern even in earlier stages in the journey, childhood experiences. And we always knew what we destined to become or how we want to live, another way of saying it. And this is true for our personal lives, business lives, all areas of our life, and our relationships with others. And so he says, you must first become aware of what you are doing with your creative power before you begin to change it. I believe it's important to journal, note down. I encourage doing this in pretty much all of my videos, because this is how I was able to bring awareness as to what was going on inside of me. I would observe, what would I think in relation to family, friends, and this was revealing my state of mind. And I know, as he says here, I'm free to occupy any state. Creation is complete. So I picked a state that is aligned with how I truly am. I go within. I find within myself how I truly am. And I noticed that when I identify with that state in my imagination, everything flows effortlessly. thinking patterns, emotional patterns, behavioral patterns, how I relate with others, and how they relate with me. It feels ideal. It feels as the character of how I truly am. And the destiny reveals itself from that premise happening inside. So I believe that we are on the journey to recalibrating ourselves back to how we truly are. And by noting these things, and perhaps in the earlier stages for some, a lot of things might be brought to the surface. This is where we get into the core beliefs. And one of the core beliefs that I would like to further encourage, which I've been encouraging all throughout these conversations, which has been very helpful to me, is that we are complete inside. We are complete in imagination. We can imagine anything, and we are one with it in imagination. And from that completion within, we actually allow that to express as the way it is. From this completion feeling within, which is encouraged by working with imagination, which we'll talk about in a moment, via the pruning shears of revision, one of the ways to do it, many ways to do it, a person finds a higher degree of completion within. This is felt experientially, thinking and feeling. And from this premise of I am complete within, I am fulfilled within, what happens is a person finds that it's easier to switch into different states of mind. Because what causes a person to go into states of mind in which they would say, this is not who I truly am. This is not an ideal state of mind of where I truly want to operate from, the premise in which I want to live from. It's thinking patterns and emotional patterns that have been brought to the surface so that we can make peace with them in regards to how we interpret or how we react based on five sensory stimulus, as in what a person says, what they do, how we respond to what they say or do in our own imagination, reveals our ability and congruence to, as he says here. Now is the time to control our imagination and attention, and by control I do not mean restraint by willpower. This is done from a place of love and compassion, as he says here. Rather, cultivation through love and compassion. And so love and compassion to ourselves is what plays out as the theater of love and compassion in relationship with others. This is what I've discovered in my journey. This is what allowed me to harmonize my relationship with my father. Love and compassion inside. When a person realizes that they're complete inside, they have compassion and love within, in the infinite world within, recognizing that this five sensory experience is an expression of the infinite world within, then what happens is the person is not looking for approval. They find that they're not demonstrating emotional patterns, behavioral patterns, thinking patterns of neediness, because they recognize that they're complete inside. And from this premise, everything happens automatically. Love and compassion is the reflection. As he says here, your world is a grand mirror, constantly telling you who you are. There was a time in my life where I felt like I was walking around on eggshells everywhere I went, and forming my own conclusions within myself as to how I should act from the premise of those interpretations, which in those days, a lot of times, were from states of mind that are not true to how I am. And bringing awareness of these patterns allowed me to observe what was going on. As he says, as you begin to observe your thoughts, you cannot avoid the realization that you alone are the cause of all that comes into your world. You alone can change it. So as mentioned, at a certain point in the journey, a person says, I want to live how I truly want to live. And they begin to take 100% responsibility for the state of mind that they dwell in. And they select the state of mind by saying to themselves, or imagining to themselves, I am this person now. I experience love and compassion wherever I go. I realize I'm complete within, and this completion plays out symbolically in different ways that I will see. I will acknowledge it when I see it. However, that's not a requirement because I see it inside. in the reality of my mind's eye, in my imagination, and that's how it is. Reality is the affirmation, or we could say suggestion in mind, because we are the only suggester. I can say a bunch of things. We could read a lot of books. Ultimately, we are suggesting what that information means to us, and it is revealing our state of mind. And we can suggest anything to ourselves to bring us back into the state of mind. We all know what that is to ourselves, what we can imagine or what we think. And we can do this through imaginary conversation via the pruning shears of revision. So as a person takes notes of the different behavioral patterns, thinking patterns, different theaters that played out in their life all throughout the day, all unlovely and destructive ideas, and concentrating on the idea you wish to attain. I do it by the pruning shears of revision. I bring him before my mind's eye, and I congratulate him on his good fortune because he is now gainfully employed. In application of the golden rule, do unto others as you would have done unto yourself. In our imagination, because now is the time, as he says, now is the time to control our imagination, and not by restraint or willpower, but by allowing ourselves to be how we truly are in imagination, from the perspective of love and compassion. Because as I've noticed this, when I imagine lovingly for others, I experience loving-based experiences in my life for myself in regards to my goals, my visions, my definite chief aim. And so he says, I allow him to accept my congratulations because I do not see a man unemployed. I see him employed, as he knows he is in my mind's eye, for in that state I have pruned him from the unemployed state and once more reshaped the branch that grows in the garden of God. And so the process. Number one, now this is how we do it. At the end of my day, I review my day. So this is where the notes, the journaling, provides us plenty of awareness and opportunity to go into our imagination and see things for how they truly are, from the perspective of love and compassion. He says, at the end of the day, I review my day. I don't judge it, I simply review it. Number two, I look over the entire day, all the episodes, all the events, all the conversations, all the meetings. Number three, and then I see it clearly in my mind's eye. I rewrite it. I rewrite it and make it conform to the ideal day I wish I had experienced. Now, here's the wonderful thing. We all know inside of how we truly want it to be. You know the answer to that. I know within myself. You know within yourself how you truly want it to be, which is based on how you truly are. And so he says, number four, I take scene after scene and rewrite it, revise it. And having revised my day, then in my imagination, I relive that day, the revised day, and I do it over and over in my imagination until the seeming imagined state begins to take onto me the tones of reality. I notice that when I do this before going to sleep, my imagination seems to be filled automatically with details, visions. It seems that I construct the scene, or I start the construction of the scene, and then the scenes seem to fill themselves in relation with our recent conversations where we talked about the millions of mental workers that build the scenes from the perspective of love, compassion, and the ideal. I find that to be very powerful, deep aspects from the infinite world within via the power of the subconscious mind. Fills in the details. So if a person is having challenge to vividly imagine or construct a scene, suggest to yourself that via the power of the subconscious mind, the scene shall fill itself to reflect the ideal, and you'll feel it. You'll feel one with it. You'll fuse with it, and you'll notice that these ways that are ideal, which for whatever the reason I wasn't able to consciously conjure up, actually play out in vivid accuracy and are actually how I truly love it to be. And so I feel that this is intuition, recognizing the power that restores everything into love and harmony, which is within us, and we see all throughout in nature, the regenerative way of how it actually is. And so he says, it seems that it's real. And I notice this, that these imaginal scenes, which seem to take control of my mind. Again, not done from a place of force, as he says here, cultivation through love and compassion. It's real, like a lucid dream. that I actually did experience it, and I have found from my experience that these revised days, if really lived, will change my tomorrows. And so, number 6, when I meet people tomorrow that today disappointed me, they will not tomorrow, for in me I have changed the very nature of that being, and having changed him, he bears witness tomorrow of the change that took place within me. And so when we see these changes occur in the next day, even to the slightest degree, what I like to do is acknowledge the change, give acknowledgement. I recognize that through giving acknowledgement, as I mentioned earlier, repetition of the same information and repetition of the same information from different perspectives in resonance with my vision. So I notice that the theater plays out in harmony with my vision and also plays out in different relationships. Perhaps I imagine lovingly in a personal relationship, and I notice that those attributes play out in relationships with others in a business context. Or in my day-to-day life, and I live in a big city and there are many people, I notice that people play out those attributes. Even though I was imagining in regards with certain individuals in my life, I notice that others show up to play out the same theater of those attributes that I imagine. As he says, I have changed the very nature of that being. And having changed him, he bears witness tomorrow of the change that took place within me. So I trust you found this video to be helpful. Let's go ahead and conclude this with an auto-suggestion to further encourage. We can say, I recognize my ability to sow imaginal conversations from the premise of how I truly am. By reaping this act, the habit is formed. Through the habit formation, I notice the character of how I truly am play out in interactions and relationships in all areas of my life. Personal life, business life, family life, romantic life, all areas of life reflect upon recognition of my completion within in love and compassion for how I truly am, which plays out as theater of how others relate to me from the perspective of harmonious relationship with love and compassion in relation to my goals, visions, in regards to my ideal self and character of how I am authentically and lovingly destined to be. If you would like a copy of this mind map, the link is in the description. Thank you very much for watching. I'll talk to you soon. Take care.